"You don't have a reservation here, sir. This hotel is fully booked." The lobby of the Harwick Grand smelled like cedar polish and old money. The kind of smell that told you before anyone opened their mouth exactly who was welcome and who was not. Terrence Holloway set his bag down on the marble floor, not because he was tired, because he wanted his hands free. The man behind the desk, his name tag said Kyle Remington, front desk supervisor, had not looked at a computer screen, had not checked a system, had not touched a single key. He had looked at Terrence Holloway, taken a full 2 seconds to absorb what he saw. The winter coat that had seen better days, the carry-on bag with a fraying strap, the face that was the wrong color for this lobby at this hour, and had made a decision. No reservation, fully booked. Sorry. Except he hadn't said sorry. "I have a booking," Terrence said, under Holloway. Kyle Remington smiled the way people smile when they've already made up their mind. "Our system doesn't show anything under that name, then your system is wrong." The lobby was not empty. A Tuesday evening in February in Ottawa, and the Harwick Grand had perhaps a dozen guests scattered across its velvet furniture. A woman reading near the fireplace. 2 men in suits waiting for someone. A young couple checking their phones at the bar entrance. None of them were looking at Terrence Holloway and Kyle Remington. Not yet. "Sir," Kyle Remington said, and the word "sir" in his mouth was a different word entirely. "I can suggest some other properties in the area that might have availability. I'm not looking for other properties." Terrence reached into his coat and took out his phone. He opened his email. He turned the screen toward the desk. "I booked this room 6 weeks ago. Confirmation number KH7741B. Superior Suite, 2nd floor, 3 nights." Kyle Remington glanced at the screen. Glanced, not looked. The way you glance at something you've already decided doesn't matter. "I'll need to verify that with my manager." "Go ahead." "She's currently." "I'll wait." There is a particular kind of waiting that black men in Canada learn early. It is not the ordinary waiting of someone who has been delayed. It is the waiting of someone who has learned that the delay itself is the message. The delay says, "You are an inconvenience. You are unexpected. You do not belong in this particular room at this particular time, and if we wait long enough, perhaps you will understand that and leave." Terrence Holloway had been waiting like this for 53 years. He was very good at it. He stood at the front desk of the Harwick Grand and did not check his phone, did not shift his weight, did not sigh or look at his watch, or do any of the things that might signal that he was willing to be moved along. He simply stood there, both hands resting on the counter, and waited. Kyle Remington made a phone call, kept his voice low. Terrence could hear fragments, claims to have a booking, won't leave, yes, I know, and then Kyle hung up and said his manager would be down in a moment. A moment turned out to be 11 minutes. Diane Courtmanch was the kind of hotel manager who had learned her authority from the architecture of the building she managed. She walked across the lobby with the confidence of someone who knew that every square foot of marble beneath her feet belonged, in a meaningful sense, to her world and not to anyone else's. She was perhaps 45, with the tight smile of someone who dealt with complaints the way a dentist deals with a difficult patient, firmly, briefly, and with the implicit understanding that the discomfort was mostly the patient's fault. "Mr. Holloway." She extended her hand. He shook it. "I understand there's been some confusion." "No confusion," Terrence said. "I have a confirmed booking. Your staff member told me you're fully booked." Diane Courtmanch turned to Kyle Remington with a look that was either explain this or back me up. It was hard to tell which. Kyle Remington straightened slightly. "I checked the system," he said. "The name didn't." "It's under Holloway," Terrence said. "T. Holloway." Confirmation KH7741B. The booking was made through your direct site on January the 4th. I have the confirmation email, the charge to my visa, and the cancellation policy, which specifies a 48-hour window, which has long passed. Diane Courtmanch was quiet for a moment. She moved to the computer terminal beside Kyle and typed something. The silence that followed was a specific kind of silence. The kind that happens when someone finds what they were hoping not to find. "Mr. Holloway," her voice had shifted, not warm exactly, but recalibrated. "I see the reservation. I apologize. It appears there was an error on our end." "What kind of error?" "A system. What kind of error causes a guest's confirmed booking not to appear when they arrive at the desk?" The question sat between them. Diane Courtmanch did not answer it. "If you'd like to check in now, we can." "I'd like to understand what happened first." The couple at the bar entrance had stopped looking at their phones. The woman near the fireplace had lowered her book by 2 inches. The two men in suits were watching now with the careful attention of people who want to see how this ends without appearing to watch. Kyle Remington said nothing. His ears had gone slightly red. Terrence Holloway had driven 4 hours from Toronto that morning. He had a 7 a.m. meeting the following day at the Department of Justice Federal Building on Wellington Street. He had packed 1 suit, 2 dress shirts, his laptop, and the black notebook he'd been carrying for 30 years. The one that now had his name embossed on the cover because someone had given it to him as a retirement gift, and then, 6 months later, he'd come out of retirement because they'd asked him to. He was tired. He had a specific kind of bone-deep tiredness that comes not just from driving 4 hours, but from a lifetime of having to fight for things that should not require fighting. He did not want to be standing in this lobby at 8:30 in the evening explaining his confirmed reservation to a desk clerk who had looked at his face and decided the system didn't show anything. But here he was, again, still. "My name is on the reservation," Terrence said. "The charge cleared my credit card. Your cancellation policy has passed. I am standing in front of you at the Harwick Grand Hotel in Ottawa, Ontario, with a valid booking for 3 nights, and your staff member told me, without checking a screen, that you were fully booked. I'd like to understand how that happens." Kyle Remington had the grace, at least, to say nothing. Diane Courtemanche was now doing something that Terrence recognized. She was calculating. Not whether she'd done something wrong, she knew the answer to that, but what the correct response was. The response that contained the situation. The response that didn't make things worse. "Mr. Holloway, I can assure you that." "That what?" She stopped. The lobby had gone very quiet. "That it wasn't intentional," she finished. Terrence looked at her for a long moment. "Intent," he said, "is interesting. A person can do something deliberately without intending for anyone to notice. A person can follow a habit so old it doesn't feel like a choice anymore, but the outcome is the same. A man walks into a hotel with a confirmed booking and is told there's no room." Something shifted in Diane Courtemanche's expression. Something she couldn't quite control. From across the lobby, the woman who had been reading near the fireplace stood up. She was perhaps 60, silver-haired, wearing a blazer. She walked toward the front desk with the unhurried stride of someone who has made a decision. "Excuse me," she said. She set her book down on the counter. She looked at Diane Courtemanche. "I couldn't help but hear. I've been staying at this hotel for 20 years. I'm Marguerite Fowler. My husband is on your board of directors. And I'd like to know the same thing this gentleman is asking." Diane Courtemanche blinked. Kyle Remington had gone from red ears to a face that had drained of most of its color. What happened next would be talked about in 2 separate ways, depending on who was telling the story. Kyle Remington would later say it was a system error, a genuine mistake, a mix-up that had nothing to do with anything except a database glitch on a busy evening. Marguerite Fowler, who had watched from the fireplace for 20 minutes before she stood up, would tell her husband something different over the phone that night. She would tell him that she had watched a man in a winter coat walk into the lobby with a bag over his shoulder, walk to the front desk, and be turned away before a single keystroke had been made. She had watched because something about it felt familiar. The way someone gets looked at in a way that decides everything before a word is spoken. She said she had almost gone back to her book. She was ashamed of that. Her husband would call the hotel's general manager the following morning. But that was later. What happened first was this. Diane Courtemanche straightened her jacket and asked Terrence Holloway if he would be willing to follow her to the desk so she could complete his check-in personally. She said this with the careful formality of someone dismantling a situation piece by piece. Terrence picked up his bag. He did not say thank you. He did not say I appreciate it, or no problem, or any of the phrases that are used to smooth over the edges of something that should not have had edges to begin with. He walked to the desk. While Diane typed, Kyle Remington moved to the far end of the counter and found something to do with a stack of folders that did not need organizing. Marguerite Fowler had not moved. She was still standing near the counter, watching in the way that a witness watches. "Room 214, Diane said, handing him the key card. "Superior suite, complimentary breakfast included for all 3 mornings. Is there anything else you need tonight?" "No," Terrence said. He took the key card. Then he looked at her, not with anger exactly, not with the heat of it, with something quieter and harder than anger. You should speak to your staff member, he said. Not because I'm asking you to, because the next person this happens to might not have their confirmation number memorized. Diane Courtemanche said nothing. He picked up his bag and walked to the elevator. The elevator doors closed, and for a moment Terrence Holloway stood alone in the small mirrored box and let himself feel it. The exhaustion of it, the old familiar weight of it, and then he pressed to and straightened his coat. He had a meeting in the morning. A specific meeting, in a specific building, with specific people who had asked him to come back, because there was a case they couldn't close, and a history they needed someone with institutional memory to help them understand. Terrence Holloway was a 58-year-old retired Crown attorney. He had spent 30 years prosecuting civil rights violations for the federal government. He had argued cases before the Supreme Court of Canada. He had a wall in his home office covered in degrees and commendations and a photograph taken in 1998 when the Prime Minister had shaken his hand and said, in front of cameras, that Terrence Holloway was one of the finest legal minds this country had produced. None of that had been visible in the lobby of the Harwick Grand. He was a man in a winter coat with a fraying bag, and that had been enough. The room was good. That was the thing about the Harwick Grand. The rooms were genuinely good. The bed was firm the way a good hotel bed should be, and the windows looked out over the Rideau Canal, dark and frozen now, lit at the edges by the low orange lights of the pathway. Terrence sat in the chair by the window for a while and looked at it. He thought about his mother, which he did in hotel rooms sometimes. She had cleaned hotel rooms for 11 years when he was a child. Not in Ottawa. In Hamilton, where they had lived in a house that was too small and always warm because she refused, she said, to have her children be cold. She had cleaned rooms in a hotel she was not allowed to be a guest in. He had not understood this when he was small. He had understood it later, and then understood it again differently when he was older. And then again when he started going to hotels for work and found himself thinking of her hands on the cleaning cart. He wondered, sometimes, whether she would have believed any of it. The degrees, the cases, the photograph with the Prime Minister. He thought she might have found the photograph funny, actually. His mother had a sense of humor that was as dry as kindling and twice as ready to catch. He took out his black notebook and wrote 3 lines. He did this every night. He had done it for 30 years. A habit from a professor who had told him once that the discipline of writing down what you observed each day was the same discipline you needed to be a lawyer. The world gives you evidence constantly, the professor had said. Most people just don't write it down. He wrote, Harwick Grand, desk clerk, didn't check the screen. Diane Courtemanche, correct decision eventually. Fowler chose to stand up. Those 2 things matter. He closed the notebook. In the morning, Terrence came down for breakfast at 7:15. The dining room was half full. Business people. A family with 2 young children, a table of women in their 70s who were talking at a volume that suggested none of them were interested in being quiet about whatever they found funny. Kyle Remington was not at the front desk. A different clerk, a young woman with close-cropped hair and a wide smile, said good morning as he passed through the lobby and meant it. The breakfast was good. Real coffee, which mattered. At 7:45, Marguerite Fowler appeared in the dining room doorway. She scanned the room, and when she found Terrence at his table by the window, she walked toward him. May I? She indicated the chair across from him. Please, Terrence said. She sat. She ordered coffee when the server came. She looked at Terrence with the directness of someone who had decided, sometime in the night, that she was going to say a thing she didn't have to say. I almost didn't stand up, she said. I want you to know that. I was sitting there, and I told myself it wasn't my business, and then I thought about how many times in my life I've told myself that. Terrence said nothing. He let her speak. My husband is going to call, she said, about last night. I hope that's all right. It's all right. I don't know if it does any good. It might, he said, or it might not. But you still had to do it. The doing of it isn't about the outcome. Marguerite Fowler looked at him. What do you do, if you don't mind my asking? I'm a lawyer, Terrence said. Retired. Mostly. What kind? Federal prosecution. Civil rights, primarily. Something crossed her face. A recalibration, similar to what Diane Courtemanche had experienced the night before, but different in quality. Hers had the texture of recognition rather than alarm. You've been doing this your whole career, she said. Fighting this, variations of it, Terrence said. Does it get better? He considered the question the way he considered most questions. as something that deserved a real answer rather than a convenient one. It gets different, he said. The form changes, but the underlying math stays the same. People make rapid calculations about who is owed basic courtesy, and those calculations run on very old data. Marguerite was quiet for a moment. My daughter says the same thing, she said. She's in the human rights field. We argue about it sometimes, whether the progress is real or whether it's just cosmetic. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. I used to say it was real. I'm less certain now. The progress is real, Terrence said. But it's not inevitable. That's the part people get wrong. It doesn't move forward on its own. Someone has to keep walking. She looked at him. Someone like you. He shook his head. Someone like everyone. That's the whole point. At 8:55, Terrence Holloway walked out of the Harwick Grand with his briefcase. Not the fraying carry-on, which he'd left in the room, but the slim leather briefcase that he'd had for 22 years, and which still looked fine because he had always taken care of his things, and walked the 4 blocks to the federal building on Wellington Street. The security guard at the entrance checked his ID, looked at it, looked at him, looked at it again. Purpose of your visit, sir? I'm counsel. I'm expected upstairs. The guard made a call. There was a brief conversation. The guard looked at him again, this time differently, the way the look always changed when the call confirmed what the person had said. 11th floor, the guard said. They're expecting you. Terrence took back his ID. He went through the scanner. He pressed the button for the elevator. The meeting room on the 11th floor held 6 people when Terrence arrived. 3 lawyers, a policy advisor, a woman from the RCMP who had driven up from Montreal, and a man named Sébastien Prou, who was the director of the Civil Rights Division, and who had called Terrence 4 months ago and asked him, with the particular urgency of someone who had run out of other options, whether he would consider coming back. Terrence had taken 3 days to say yes. He had conditions. He always had conditions. He took his place at the table and opened his briefcase and set out his notebook and his pen and his reading glasses, and the meeting began. He was there for 6 hours. He didn't think about the hotel lobby once. That is not quite true. It sat in the background the way a low sound ant sits in a room, present but not occupying the foreground. He had learned to do this over a career, to let the background stay background, to put the foreground where it needed to be. The foreground today was a case involving a series of discriminatory hiring practices at a federal contractor, documented across 4 provinces, stretching back 11 years. It was a case with 187 pages of evidence that had been assembled by 2 lawyers who were very good and very young, and who had hit a wall because they didn't know how to connect the older precedents to the current framework. Terrence knew. He spent 6 hours explaining it. At 3 in the afternoon, Sébastien Prou leaned back in his chair and said, "This is why I called you." "I know," Terrence said. "Will you take it through to argument?" Terrence looked at the stack of documents on the table. He thought about his house in Toronto, where the backyard had needed work for 3 years, and he kept meaning to get to it. He thought about his daughter, who was a pediatric surgeon in Vancouver, and who called every Sunday, and who had told him when he came out of retirement the first time that she didn't know whether to be proud of him or frustrated with him. He had told her, both. Both was fine. "Yes," he said. "I'll take it through." He got back to the hotel at 4:30. The afternoon light was low and gold through the lobby windows, falling across the marble floor in long rectangles. The fireplace was lit. The young woman with the close-cropped hair was still at the front desk. She looked up when he came in and smiled the same wide smile. "Good afternoon, Mr. Holloway. How was your day?" "Good," he said, and meant it in the complicated way that a day can be good and heavy at the same time. In the elevator on the way up, he passed Marguerite Fowler coming down. She had her coat on and a scarf in one hand. "Mr. Holloway," she nodded. "Mrs. Fowler." They rode in silence for 1 floor. When the doors opened, she stepped out, then turned back. "My husband called this morning," she said. "The general manager is looking into it." "Thank you," Terrence said. "Don't thank me. It should have been done last night without any of this." She held his gaze for a moment. He nodded. The elevator doors closed. He ordered room service that evening, sat by the window again with his notebook. The canal was the same, dark frozen, the low orange lights at the edges. He wrote, "The case is worth taking. Sébastien is right. 187 pages is a start. The real count is higher. It always is." Then he wrote, "Fowler stood up. The doing of it matters even when the outcome is uncertain. That's what I told her. I should believe it myself more often. He put the pen down. He looked out at the canal and thought about a lot of things. His mother's hands, his daughter's voice on Sunday mornings, the way certain rooms change their quality when you walk into them, and certain people decide in the first 2 seconds whether you're there by right or by accident. He thought about the 187 pages on the table upstairs in the federal building. And the people behind those pages, the ones who had applied for jobs and not gotten them, and never quite known why. The ones who had not had a confirmation number memorized. The ones who had not had a Marguerite Fowler standing near the fireplace. He would argue this case. He would argue it carefully, and at length, and with the full weight of 30 years of knowing exactly where to push. He would argue it because it was the right case to argue. And then, if it went well, he would go home and fix the backyard. His daughter would call on Sunday, and he would tell her about the hotel, and she would be quiet for a moment, the way she always was when he told her these things. Not surprised, never surprised, just tired in the way that particular knowledge makes people tired. And then she would say, "Are you okay, Dad?" And he would say, "Yes, I'm fine." And he would mean it in the way he always meant it, which was, "I'm still here. I'm still walking. That's what okay looks like for me." She knew this about him. She had always known it. That was, Terrence Holloway thought, looking out at the frozen canal in the February dark, enough. Not everything, but enough. He closed the notebook. He went to bed. In the morning he had a second meeting, and a case worth arguing, and a backyard waiting for him at home. That was plenty.